So how did the situation in Syria get to this point? Let's take a look back. Turkish forces open a new front in the ongoing Syrian conflict, placing Kurdish fighters in its crosshairs after President Trump unexpectedly orders U.S. troops to withdraw from the war-torn country.
We have no soldiers in the area. We've been talking to Turkey for 3 years. They've been wanting to do this for many years, as you know. They've been fighting each other for centuries.
Monday, October 7th, the U.S. begins evacuating the 1,000 troops posted in northeastern Syria who've been supporting the Kurds fight against ISIS. 2 days later, on Wednesday, October 9th, heavy fighting breaks out as Turkey begins pushing the Syrian Democratic Forces away from the border. As fears grow that the instability will lead to a resurgence in the Islamic Caliphate, Kurdish authorities say their resources guarding ISIS prisoners are getting stretched thin.
We had to pull out many forces to the front line. If there is not enough forces, the prisoners will take advantage and escape.
A claim that even worries some of Trump's closest allies. Senator Lindsey Graham speaking directly to the president this week.
Every national security expert that you have to advise you suggests that if we abandon the Kurds, it will hurt us down the road, but ISIS is likely to come back and Iran will be the biggest winner.
Tuesday, October 15th. Amid the chaos, Russian troops start to pop up, flying their flag over joint Russian-Syrian government patrols a few days into the Turkish offensive. Much of the fighting centers around the Kurdish-held border city of Ras Al Ain, where shelling, air raids, and constant battling forced thousands of civilians to flee another round of violence. Thursday, October 17th. As criticism of Trump's decision mounts in Washington and Syria, Vice President Mike Pence flies to Ankara to negotiate a 5-day-long ceasefire with Turkish President Recep Erdogan. That involves carving out a no-Kurd buffer zone along the Turkish-Syrian border.
Our administration has already been in contact with Syrian defense forces, and we have already begun to facilitate their safe withdrawal from the nearly 20-mile wide safe zone area.
But reports from the ground indicate that fighting in that safe zone area, as the vice president mentioned, is still ongoing, creating more refugees by the day.
Yeah, more casualties as well. With that, we bring in senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, former intelligence officer Michael Prigent. Good to see you. You listen to that. A no-Kurd zone, that's like saying we're not going to have any Texans in Texas.
Right. It's a 20-mile deep zone, and it stretches from border to border, all the way to the Iraqi border. And basically, in the next 120 hours, Kurdish forces have to move out, or they become targets in a free fire zone.
Are they targets already? It doesn't seem as though the Turks are really keeping
they're targets already, and Turkey is being criticized for targeting them. Turkey believes that after 120 hours, everything's fair game.
The president and his administration say, look, this is a ceasefire, the Kurds are happy with this deal, on and on.
The Kurds are not happy with this deal.
I haven't talked to any who are either.
Nobody's happy with this deal.
Except perhaps the Russians and the...
This is a win for Assad, Russia, Iran, ISIS. And this is not a win for Turkey. Even though Turkey thinks this is a win, there's international condemnation of what they're doing. And they just pretty much pushed in a Sunni force into this Kurdish area that they can't control. A force that wants revenge.
You say that the Turks won't think this is a win. On the other hand, they pushed around the United States, at least if you believe the timeline. They told the U.S., we're doing this, and the U.S. said, well, gee, all right, go ahead, we'll take our guys out.
The president said that.
Right.
Everybody else said, we shouldn't do this.
Well, everybody else does what the president tells them to do. So.
DOD said no, Department of State said no, and Erdogan, this is a Erdogan victory over Trump, but this is an Erdogan loss with everyone else, with the U.S. Congress, the Senate. There's a bipartisan criticism against what Erdogan is doing. Sanctions are coming. Talks of whether or not Turkey should remain in NATO are coming. There will be ramifications of this operation.
The Constitution, though, is pretty clear. The president sets the foreign policy.
Yes.
Zoom out on this for the rest of the world who is watching this, as strong men like Erdogan, of whom there are many around the world, say, gee, if Erdogan got away with it, maybe I can too.
There's that. If Erdogan got away with this, I can too. There's also, this reinforces the arguments from countries like Iran, say that you can't trust the Americans. They will break their deals with you. They will abandon you.
Yeah.
And this is a positive.
Russians are making that argument too.
Al-Qaeda will make that argument. ISIS will make that argument. Shia militias on the ground will make that argument. The Taliban will make that argument. You cannot work with the U.S. because they will abandon you.
Is there any similarities? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, to quote Twain. To President Obama's deal with the Taliban over Bergdahl, he thought it was going to be a huge win. It turned out to be a disaster domestically on a bipartisan basis.
I think that's a very fair comparison. The other comparison is this is exactly what Trump criticized Obama for doing in Iraq, leaving too soon and giving rise to ISIS. The president is doing that right now ahead of a 2020 election, where he simply has destabilized the northern Syria and giving ISIS an opportunity to reemerge.
If you look at the president's Twitter feed, he's pushing back on all the narratives that you have given, in fairness. There now comes the question, is there anything he can do to make good on the promises that he's made? Is there anything left to do to protect the Kurds? Is there anything to do to push back on Erdogan and the Syrians and Assad and the Russians?
You can't do anything because Erdogan can't actually control the force that he's pushing into northern Syria. You can't even distinguish between Erdogan's fighters and ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra, because they all will look the same and they'll be killing everyone. So who will you actually target outside of getting solid intel on a high-value target, a senior ISIS leader? But the president will have a year to mitigate the ramifications of this decision ahead of the election. If he did this next year at this time, he wouldn't have time to recover before Election Day.
Yeah, well, already there's reports of the American forces bombing their own bases in a way to trade. So doubtful they're going back to those. All right, Michael, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Molly?